So today I'm going to be talking about the curatorial process of an exhibition project that's been in the making for quite a few years, since 2018. So sort of continuing on as well with some of the discussion that's already been had today around what has happened to curatorial practice and exhibition making through the pandemic. And this work is my research creation dissertation within the Department of Communication Studies at Concordia University. The exhibition, titled Improvement Becomes a Wall and the River Meanders Still, is a web-based exhibition featuring two audio works by my two artist collaborators, Danica Evering and Harper. And the two audio works are also accompanied by an archive of sort of pieces of the curatorial process rather than a curatorial or exhibitionary statement. And the starting point for this exhibition was a critical rereading of the history of colonial development of the Lower Don River, Wonscotonach in Toronto. And so thinking about sort of the historical interventions that have taken place along this site since colonization and the development of Toronto, and in particular, the Don Improvement Project of 1886. And it's essential to acknowledge that this exhibition came into being on the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Wendat, and the Haudenosaunee. The territory is within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Of course, as we all know, it's difficult to kind of present a curatorial project in a 20-minute time span, and this one, as I've said, has spanned since 2018, so there's a lot of facets involved. But today I want to really discuss this concept of the meander and how I've sort of taken that up and it's influenced the curatorial process. So the seeds of this exhibition really began with my childhood relation to the river. Growing up in community housing in the nearby Little Indian neighborhood of Toronto, and frequently visiting and walking the Don with my mother. This site has always been a really important and kind of influential and also magical space for me growing up in Toronto. And this work has also been a process of unlearning, particularly unlearning the colonial history of a site that has become and been so familiar to me for so many years. As a white settler Canadian of mixed Irish and British ancestry and a first-generation student, I know that there's so much that I don't know and so much that I need to unlearn about the land on which I live as an uninvited guest. In my work as a settler curator, I work hard to destabilize the reproduction of settler coloniality within exhibitionary and curatorial practice. Here, in the context of this project, through taking up the meander as a curatorial process that tries to find value outside of normative or colonial understandings of how art, knowledge, and exhibitions are produced. So I turn to the site. I took up this curatorial project in the early spring of 2018, renewing my childhood relation to the river. Beginning work on my dissertation, I was developing a project at the intersections of research creation, the curatorial, and feminist site-specific art practice. And it was my supervisor, Monica Gagnon, who encouraged me to really think with a site that I felt connected to, thus reigniting my pull towards the Lower Don River and Valley. Researching and writing from Montreal at that point, I pored over digital archives, tracing images of the landscape's many lives. And through this research, I learned about the 1886 Don Improvement Plan. Through the writings, of historian Jennifer L. Bonnell and Canadian naturalist and Don Valley preservationist and advocate for the Don, Charles Sorial, and thus began a line of questioning around this notion of improvement. So going back, in the late 19th century, development and industry flanking the Don River had really heavily impacted the waterway, causing slow-moving polluted waters, and there was also a lot of concerns at this point around the continued flooding of the Don and its impacts on local industry, of which there were a multitude, including distilling, farming, brick-making. The Don Improvement Plan, which was inspired by the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland, Ohio, was a project to channelize the Don, widening and straightening the river to enhance the industrial capacity of the waterway and valley to flush waste, and importantly at the time to create a central corridor for boat and railway travel. And the project experienced many complications and ultimately failed in its initial goal to create this massive transport corridor in the vein of the Cuyahoga, or another example to think about, the Lachine Canal in Montreal. However, the lower Don was still channelized, straightening the meandering curves of the river and widening and deepening the Don into a single concrete-lined channel, now sort of colloquially known as the Narrows. So here you can see the initial Don Improvement Plan, so the kind of winding, meandering flow of the river, and then the straightened channel that's marked out here. So my curatorial research in the form of walks primarily and archival and historical research looks at this history of the river, the channel, and also a small pedestrian bridge, which you can sort of see in the background here. And this bridge is named in a few pieces of infrastructural documentation as the red/weathering bridge, as it is kind of literally a red but also very heavily weathered bridge, which marks the point between the flowing meander of the undeveloped river to the north, so beyond this bridge. And here in orange is kind of marked the place where that red weathering bridge is. And you can see the flow of the meander to the north, and then to the south, the straightened channel. And here, an archival image of the straightened and channelized Don River from 1948. So the exhibition, Improvement Becomes a Wall and the River Meanders Still, suggests a counter-narrative to the proposed improvement of Wonscotonach via its straightening and channelization. Here thinking about straightening as a metaphor for taming, the normative, the colonial, etc. And here within the curatorial process of this exhibition, attunement to the specificities of place created the conditions for other histories, narratives, and stories, and modes of engaging with the land to emerge. So here, just a short excerpt from one of the two audio works, this one by Danica Evering. Over hundreds of years, the Don curved into a meander, twisting through the valley, moving glacial till, moved by stones and gravity and weather. When the rain rushes in, it still floods over its concrete banks, blurring the line between river and houses, an undoing, moving plants, animals, people. It will be contained or improved. They are digging a new mouth for the river in a low-lying section of the valley, springing from the river's lips, peat mouth, bright green rushes, from tiny seeds covered by landfill for 100 years, bright ringing. So this exhibition unfolded as a meander, as I've said, moving through the conditions of a global pandemic
and drawing inspiration from the river's flows and a framing of curation as research creation, which is indebted to my ongoing collaborative work with the Curatorial Research Creation Collective. Myself, Matthew Robin Nye, and Karen Wong. The Meanders River in southwestern Turkey, historically the Meander gave us this word, meander. The word is from ancient Greek and also names the river's patron deity, Meander, one of the sons of Oceanus and Tethys. Drawing inspiration from the meander of the Don, the path of this exhibition saw many ebbs and flows, took turns, experienced drought and flood, and in the end would not have been possible without embracing the meander of the river as a model for curatorial process. The process did not follow a normative linear trajectory, instead embracing the winding and divergent flows of research creation curatorial techniques. Writing about the process of writing itself, Jane Allison describes the meanders locating of pleasure in the journey, saying there's a deliberate slowness, a delight in curving this way or that, luxuriating in diversions, carving slow labyrinths of time. And certainly the pandemic allowed for a kind of new conceptualization of time for many people, quickening, slowing, kind of being divorced from time as we experience it, or have experienced it pre-pandemic. As a project that began in late 2018, this exhibition has been formed and informed by life both before and during the global COVID-19 pandemic. It's been deeply impacted by personal, political, local, and global phenomenon, and the various phases of the curatorial process have been conditioned by the temporally and geographically specific conditions from which they emerge. This exhibition was initially intended as a site-specific intervention through live performances, and of course that changed through the pandemic. And following the form of the river's meander, the exhibition was able to pivot and transform and become even more meaningful in the process. So a little bit about the exhibition's unfolding and the works themselves. I've been working with Hamilton-based writer and sound composer Danica Evering from the very early stages of the exhibition's coming into being. Danica and I met in 2016 while working as research assistants on the Montreal Signs Project, and over the years in different capacities, I have been drawn to Danica's critical movements between the roles of artist, curator, and writer, and her self-reflexive practice, as well as her really beautiful prose in various sound walks. Together, we took our first walk along the Lower Don River and Valley on October 15th, 2019. And after that point, we continued our communication virtually for the coming months until I moved to Toronto last minute and totally by chance on March 1st, 2020, with huge plans of what I had intended to do. But of course, that was derailed just 12 days after I had moved when the city went into lockdown. After the March 2020 lockdown for the remainder of the year, I was holding out hope for this to be a site-specific in-person event. But as the months wore on, I had to move with the conditions of the time. The shift to an online exhibition furthered the goals of our collective work. It really made sense that this work would leave no trace on the land, but rather on the imaginaries of those who would experience it. A second artist was folded in at this point, who has since stepped away from the project due to a very complicated situation around their Indigenous identity, which has been called into question. Research and site visits continued, and as the works of my artist collaborators began to develop, we started thinking about the impact of an audio-based exhibition. So this was not the original intention, but through walks, through collaborative work, we started thinking about the importance of sound as a way about thinking through the site and thinking about rivers. Sound has historically been overlooked as a mode of analyzing and documenting waterscapes due to the fact that Western historical studies have long been really visual in their focus. Stories and histories of land are most often told through photographs, maps, paintings, and descriptions in the written word, all relying on the visual. Peter A. Coates argues that Western history, particularly environmental history, has been, quote, soundproofed. In tending to water, particularly the flows of rivers, which have become really ubiquitous with thinking through environmental history, sonic experiencing must not be ignored. Waterways are particularly intense sonic places. And river soundscapes present a history of changing landscapes through colonization, industrialization, and within the case of the Don, the more recent renaturalization projects, of which there's this other overlay of the sounds of construction work. The shift to a sound-based exhibition really furthered the meaning and the impact of our work. During a site visit with Danica on October 2nd, 2021, we were exploring the river and valley far beyond the designated recreational trails of the lower river. So here are some images from our walks. Fueled by a childlike curiosity on this particular walk, we went further than we ever had before. Following the really faint desire lines of those who had explored beyond the pathways before us. This was a particularly generative site visit, and nearing its end, Danica reflected on our own playful curiosity and its mirroring of my childhood love for the river and valley. I'd been already thinking about inviting another artist, collaborator into this project, and then it only seemed natural to invite someone who I've known since childhood. So thus, another artist was folded in, Elijah Harper, who is a Toronto-born queer pianist, beatmaker, and synth pop producer with Jamaican ancestry. And so again, following the Meander as curatorial process, really maintaining an openness to new possibilities and shifts based on the kind of ever-changing experiences of an encounter or an idea. And here, through a global pandemic and a site as well that's ever-changing through its ongoing construction, as I've mentioned, so the Portland's renaturalization project. So here, the kind of existing mouth of the Lower Don River via the Keating Channel, and the future Portland's proposal for the mouth of the Don. In their chapter to Culture Curation as an Active Verb, Rax Media Collective offers some notes for artistic and curatorial practice, or what they call Riaz, a North Indian classical music tradition, Riaz, or the everyday cultivation of one's musicality. So I want to share their note number 2, unintended consequences. The willingness to be open to all possibilities, including some that are neither anticipated nor intended. The capacity to experience the emergence of new desires of practice when confronted with new contextual possibilities. An abeyance of foreclosure, recognition of the occasional unpredictability of the familiar, and the patience necessary for surprise go hand in hand. With openness to unintended consequences, the practitioner remains alert even to the unimagined, which is something I think the difficulties of this process have really afforded. So finally, turning to a framing of research creation as curatorial technique. The concept of the meander as a research creation process takes inspiration from the flows of the Don, and also from Aaron Manning and Brian Masumi's conceptualization of research creation. This term emerges out of an academic context, particularly thinking about funding creative and thinking research practices. But the naming really affords the opportunity for those working within institutional spaces to propose and create projects that disrupt the major forces of disciplinary method. Research creation following Aaron Manning is allied to the minor and its tendency toward other forms of research creation not easily captured by the major. And also further allied to Fred Moten and Stefano Harney's term study. So research creation is really a practice of workshopping, rehearsal, jamming, walking, playing. So the meander is not only a model for process, it's also a model for the form of the exhibition itself, which is still a work in process, but I'm nearing the end of my PhD, and the exhibition and my defense will both be happening in late fall. The exhibition is a single scrolling page. It has a beginning and an end, but it doesn't follow a straight line. The two audio works are presented alongside questions, situating provocations, field notes, and asides that speak to the curatorial process. So some more images from site research, and then just in the last 30 seconds, I just want to show a bit of the exhibition. And also just share a really brief field note that sort of looks at this kind of idea of the meander and how it actually has taken place through my curatorial process. So the field note that I'll read was from a site visit with Danica on September 26, 2020. And I've gathered a few field notes that are written in the style of Lauren Berlant and Kathleen Stewart's The Hundreds to document in short 100-word paragraphs the effective intensity of what took place. And this field note also exists in the exhibition itself. So Danica and I met on a sweltering September afternoon. After months of tinkering with soldering irons and tiny mechanisms, her hydrophone was ready for its dip in the dawn. We walked south from the Riverdale pedestrian bridge to the perfect spot below the Queen Street Viaduct. The hydrophone dropped into the water and we took turns listening. Nothing. We listened harder, attuning to each little bubble, swoosh, and sound, hardly a noise. It felt like it felt like failure. We packed up and left, making plans to return in early spring with the hopes of apprehending a thaw-induced cacophony of sound. We walked north from the viaduct towards Dundas Street Bridge. Failure had expanded our attentions. Considering the abundance of life, through tender listening to the Don River, we had become attuned to the sounds of the land. I was keen to each crack of a twig, rustle of a leaf, and flap of a bird. We followed the same route back, step for step. A few hundred meters along, we were struck by the overwhelming sonic vibration of a few dozen bees. The sound was almost deafening, for careful ears harmonized the land. Bright yellow bees on purple aster. Thanks.